Bonjour, je suis ici comme chef de Parti vert du Canada avec mon collègue, député de Kitchener Centre, l'Honorable Mike Morris. I'm very pleased to have a moment to say anything about the events of today. I had been certain that given the order accepted by unanimous consent for today's proceedings, that at around 5:40, I would take the floor to give a 10-minute speech in response to the fall economic statement. I've been, as I think we all have been, shocked by the events of today. This is an unprecedented day in which a Minister of Finance left the stage, the political stage, as Minister of Finance, and left Cabinet mere hours before the update. La mise à jour pour aujourd'hui, financement, ce n'est pas seulement une tradition, c'est obligatoire. Et aujourd'hui, toutes les traditions, toutes les lois de notre système sont ignorées. It's been a shocking day. I was then further shocked to find that once the minister, and it was the leader of the government in the House, the Honourable Karina Gould, dropped the statement, so at least we're allowed to talk about it, having been in lockup for so long, to try to read it and digest it and have something cogent to say about it. We were then informed that none of us would be able to make speeches about it. No one would be able to debate it. There was an effort at unanimous consent. It was blocked by one Liberal MP. This is, again, quite shocking. I want to start by saying something that someone should have said by now, which is that the Honourable Chrystia Freeland, as Deputy Prime Minister, as someone who, she was Deputy Prime Minister, but initially since 2015 in Cabinet, first as Minister for International Trade. Tough gig when you suddenly find in 2016 you're up against Donald Trump, you're renegotiating NAFTA. Then we're in a situation where she's Minister of External Affairs, then Finance Minister since 2020, dealing with COVID, dealing with Trump, dealing with the crises that have come to us, and here's someone uniquely qualified to deal with Putin invading Ukraine. Chrystia Freeland was banned from Russia before anyone else because she was a brave journalist who worked in Moscow and called him out. She's a brave human being who is extraordinarily fluent in Russian and Ukrainian, and English and French. Now, I don't agree with her on everything. We've had many debates and arguments about climate action. But it's a damn shame when someone as qualified and brilliant as Chrystia Freeland is fired by the Prime Minister on a Friday, leaves this place without anything like the required round of speeches to say thank you. Merci. Spasiba. Here's somebody who's worked so hard for this country, who is told she's not going to be in Cabinet anymore, given another portfolio, rather. I should be clear. Apparently on Friday she was told she wasn't going to be Minister of Finance anymore, but could stay in a different position. She chose today to resign instead. This has been a tough day for all of us, I think, especially I can't imagine what it's like for people in the Liberal caucus. But then we have the chance to read the fall economic statement, but no chance to talk about it. This is thin gruel indeed. Canadians need real action on a range of issues, from affordability, housing, grocery prices. But for us, I'm grounded in what the world's going to look like for my grandbaby who was just born October 30th, and all I can think about is that the climate crisis is galloping towards us, and we're busy with other distractions when we could be focusing on what's necessary to protect our children and having a healthy economy at the same time. Selon le Parti vert, c'est une journée très triste aujourd'hui, mais aussi il reste affreux qu'avec tout l'avis des scientifiques comme le GIEC, nous continuons comme un Parlement d'ignorer la crise climatique, de refuser de faire face à cette crise. We can do it together. If we pull together, we have barely enough time to save ourselves. And I can't begin to imagine how I will ever face those grandchildren with what's coming unless we fight like hell in the time we have left. Et maintenant, je donne la parole à mon collègue, Mike Morris.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, Mike Morris, MP for Kitchener Centre. As Elizabeth, deeply troubled by the events of today, the certainly unprecedented way that Parliament has unfolded today, but even more so troubled by what we see in the fall economic statement, or even more what isn't there when it comes to addressing the affordability of day-to-day life, when it comes to addressing the climate crisis, when it comes to addressing the soaring costs of housing at a time in communities like mine when folks are getting left behind. This government can't even take the time to recognize they made a mistake when they offered an HST exemption to for-profit developers of rental housing and afford the same exemption to nonprofit builders of affordable home ownership, let alone what they actually need to be doing when it comes to building the social housing we need, like federal governments did back in the 70s and the 80s, if they were going to be honest about what is needed to rise to the challenge of the housing crisis. When it comes to the climate crisis, very similar. The only section on public transit in this entire document is a mere mention of a feasibility study for a bridge in Ottawa, not to say for what to be done for the rest of the country. Deeply troubling to see that there isn't more substance in this document at a time when Canadians expect far more. If anything, it gives a deeper sense that the governing party of today is not in a place to restore for Canadians a sense of the promise of what Canada can be. For young people who are thinking, how can I afford to find a well-paying job, to hold that job, to afford good housing, to think about a future for them, they ain't it. And in the meantime, the opposition, when they speak about actually going and backsliding on climate and making things all the worse, is all the more disturbing. It kind of reinvigorates for me the sense of how important it is as a Green, alongside Elizabeth, to be here every single day thinking about how we can use the time and the parliamentary tools we have to advocate for our communities. And when I think about folks in Kitchener today, that means showing up every day to fight for people living with disabilities who are living in poverty, who get, this talk of a disability benefit that would leave folks living in poverty. We need to continue, and we will continue as Greens, to call for better for folks living in poverty, including the disproportionate number of people living with disabilities living in poverty who deserve to be lifted above the poverty line. We're going to continue to call for real climate action that recognizes the science and the urgency required, as Elizabeth has done in this place for so many years. And as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to housing, for the kind of action from federal governments that we've seen in years past, that we should see from federal governments once again. We're here ready and waiting to work with all other parties to be constructive in continuing to advocate for the solutions that folks in our communities are calling for.
Merci tout le monde. Thank you, Mike Morris. And thank you, CPAC, for being here to bring the news of Parliament to living rooms across the country. It's appreciated. Joyeux Noël.